I'm Casey Friday, and in this lesson, we're going to go over how the internet works. I'm sure it can seem really complex from a micro level when you're thinking about all the complex little pieces of code and communication and hardware that connects everything together. But when you take a look from a big picture standpoint, it can be much easier to understand how everything is connected together. The first question is, what is the internet? And technically, it's a network of connected computers and machines, but we're going to look at it from a device standpoint. So in this lesson, we're going to go over when you want to connect to the internet, what happens, what devices are used, how do they talk to each other, and what's the end result when everything is all said and done. The first piece of the puzzle is you. So this is your laptop or your phone or tablet that you're using to actually try to reach out to the internet. When you make a request to either watch a Netflix video, a YouTube, or go to a website, the next device that your personal device is going to talk to will be a router and a modem if you're on your home Wi-Fi network, or if you're on a cellular network, it'll be talking to a cell tower. Those devices are connected to your internet service provider. For example, Spectrum is one of them, AT&T is another service provider. Each of your personal devices, like your router and your modem, are connected to your ISP through the use of either copper or fiber cables. And with most cell towers, they're using fiber cables to connect to the service providers. So after the service provider receives the request for information, they will send their request over copper or fiber to actual servers. And that would mean Amazon Web Services or Google Cloud, Linode, anything that's actually hosting the information, which could also include home servers that people are running in their actual households. So this could come full circle if you're trying to run all the way back into your own home server that's broadcasting to the internet. How do you actually view a website? So we've talked about how the data flows from one device to the next, but when you actually type in a URL in your browser, like youtube.com, how does that connect with the rest of the internet? Well, the first thing that will happen is your browser, being Chrome or Firefox or Safari, is going to do a DNS search to try to find what the matching IP address is for that URL. So youtube.com has an internet protocol address, and a DNS search is what is used to find that. There are three different ways that are primarily used for finding the IP address to domain name relationship. The first one would be if your ISP supplies your DNS search results. And this would mean that when you type in an address, the request is going to skip your computer and your router and go straight to, let's say, AT&T and say, what is the IP address for youtube.com? That means that AT&T will say, I have my phone book listing of domain names to IP addresses. Here's the IP address for youtube.com. The second way that this can work is if you set a network-wide DNS value on your router. And in this example, we're using 8.8.8.8, which is Google's DNS servers. So if you have this set up on your home Wi-Fi router, every device that connects to your router is going to be using that DNS value. And what this means is when you type something in your browser, it's going to send the request to 8.8.8.8 to ask Google, what is the resulting IP address for this domain that I'm typing in? The reason you would use Google's DNS servers is that they are much more widely propagated around the world. And so your response times are going to be quicker. The lookups will probably be quicker, and you'll probably have a faster internet experience. The third option is you can actually set the DNS values on your computer or your phone or whatever device you're using to browse. So if you use this will only affect the device you're using, which means, let's say you set that to the Quad 9 IP address for DNS searches. When you type in youtube.com, your device is going to send a request to 9.9.9.9 to ask, what is the IP address for this URL? The reason you would choose a different DNS server like that is for privacy reasons. And this can be used with quite a few different DNS services. There are even some you can run on your local network so that when they receive a search that is going to be intercepted by a third party or a bad actor, they can block those address searches. Nonetheless, once that IP address is found, your browser will be connected to that IP address. And then everything else that is sent back and forth between your browser and this server where your site is hosted will be communicated using that IP address. What happens next? On the remote server, website files are stored in server-side code and some browser-side code. PHP is an example of server-side code where when the PHP is run on the server, it's translated into HTML for the browser to read later. There is other site content such as username content or post content, anything that's dynamic on the website, that's all going to be stored in a database. Examples of databases are MySQL and Postgre, and essentially the PHP code will reach out to the database and say, what are the most recent 10 blog posts? And it will pull the most 10 recent blog posts and then convert them into HTML code that your browser can interpret. The web server itself on this host, let's go back to the YouTube example. We're going to say on Google servers, the actual server that's running YouTube is running a web server that's either Apache or Nginx or any sort of web server that they want to use to provide those files. And what that will do is take the requests that are coming all the way from your device through your router to the ISP, and it will convert that into something that the website itself can understand so it knows what to provide to you. So once it does that, the web server will translate the server-side code into HTML that your browser can read and display for you to see. And the JavaScript that's located on these pages is actually rendered by your web browser. You'll notice that a lot of companies, when they release a new version of their web browser, will tout how fast the new JavaScript engines are. This means that if you have a more powerful computer or a newer version of the web browser, you can possibly get better performance with JavaScript rendering, which means your whole internet experience will be much faster. Going back to your computer or phone or router, after this whole handshake has been performed, your device is going to store the IP address that is related to the domain name you just typed in. The reason it does this is so every time you go to a new page on that same domain name, it doesn't have to go out and search for what the IP address is again, because that would be a huge waste of time. So this is all stored in something called a DNS cache. And essentially, if you have this set up on your router can store the IP address relationship to each domain name that you type in. And that means if you visit a news website and then someone else in your household views that same news website, the router will tell them exactly what the IP address is without them having to search the internet for it. So this saves time and definitely saves on resources. Your browser will also store site information like HTML and images and CSS. And the reason it does this is if your browser stores large things like images that take a long time to download the first time, if they're local on your computer, they're going to be nearly instant loading the next time you visit that site. So the web server itself will dictate exactly how long these things will be stored. It could be 1 day, it could be 30 days, it could just be 30 minutes. And your browser will respect that rule. And then let's say you visit a website and all of the images are stored in your local cache. Then the next time your browser realizes my 1 day is up or my 30 days are up, they're going to try to download those images again so they can get a new version if there's a new version of them and make sure they're not serving you stale content. Your site preferences like form info and login status are stored in something that's called cookies. And these cookies are used to ensure that you have an optimal performance when you're switching between pages on the same website and even between multiple websites at some times, although this can be used to track you as you're going between websites. And there are plugins that can be installed to prevent this tracking. So for instance, if you filled out a form info on Amazon.com and then you switch to Netflix.com, if Netflix is able to search for the same cookies that you use on Amazon, then they could potentially get information that would allow them to learn your browsing habits and see exactly which sites you go to back and forth. And with that, that's how the internet works. If you have any questions, please let me know.